afternoon and welcome to iScreemZ. My guest today, the word legend gets thrown around a little bit too much. I don't think legend is exactly a big enough word in this case. This man's resume basically reads like a greatest hits of sci-fi fans, our childhood and our present day. Let's talk about this. We've got Bionic Woman. We've got the Incredible Hulk. We have Alien Nation, among so many others. He's also an awesome novelist. His new novel, Homecoming, is released this November. And yes, I'd very much like to welcome Mr. Kenneth Johnson to iScreemZ. Kenneth, how are you, sir?
Steve, I am fine, but you please must call me Kenny. My father was Kenneth, and so I was always Kenny. And that's what all my family and friends call me, at least to my face. And so please, Kenny's fine.
Fantastic. That is absolutely great. Thank you. So Kenny, there you go, right? I'm going to get right out of the gate. You have been, and you continue to be an inspiration for sci-fi writers, taking their first steps into a writing career in this genre. Can you tell us a little bit about your formative years as you were kind of taking your first steps into the genre?
It's interesting. Well, I had never had any intentions of becoming the sci-fi guy. It happened, I think, just sort of fortuitously, or maybe a friend, my composer friend, longtime composer friend Joe Harnell, used to have a sign on his piano that said "Bloom where you are planted," and that's sort of what happened in this case. I went into the theater. I was active in drama in high school for reasons I can explain, and sort of decided I wanted to have a career in the theater. And I was lucky enough to audition and get into what was then Carnegie Tech. It's now Carnegie Mellon University. The drama department there had been quite legendary for decades. As the most prestigious drama school in the country. I was among like 1,500 people that auditioned, even though I was going in and not as an actor but as a director. But they still make the directors jump through the same hoops of fire. And I was one of the 94 of us that did get selected, and it was terrific. I had 4 years of the most intense theatrical training in the history of theater, and all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans and the Restoration periods and the Renaissance and Shakespeare, of course, and all the way up to the contemporaries, Ibsen and Ionesco and everything. So I really had a classic theater training. As a director, you had to take all the classes that the actors took. And you had to act on the stage, and you had to really learn the whole Stanislavski approach to creating a character and how an actor prepares. And so the story, the class, and there was no film or TV. It was strictly a theater school. As a matter of fact, if you mentioned, oh, I think I might like to be in film, people would go, really? And if you said, oh, well, TV is an option, and they'd go, oh, no, this is a theater school, So I had that training, but at the same time, in my freshman year at Carnegie, one of my freshman week, the first week I was there, I had the good fortune of meeting a guy on campus who was a fellow named Bill Pence. He was not in the drama department. He was a business major, and he was sort of a big man on campus. He ran the school newspaper, and he ran a couple of other campus operations, but he also ran what was called the Film Arts Society. And for $3, you got a little ticket that allowed you to see on each Thursday, Bill would screen one of the classics of silent or all the classic films, all the way back to the silence and all the way up to the present day. And I'd always been a big movie fan, Steve, but what Bill introduced me to was the cinema. And I ended up, when Bill graduated, taking over the Film Society as it was really a one-man operation. And I ran it for 4 years, put myself through college doing it, and also setting up other film societies and other colleges. So by the time I got out of Carnegie, I had not only the theatrical training, one-on-one with all the great professors at the time at Carnegie, but I also had this whole cinematic training of seeing all the great films, 300 or 400 of the best films in the history of the world. So I really sort of had both. At the same time I was doing it, Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard were going to the Paris Cinematheque. They were my
Wow.
age. They were getting their training from the Paris Cinematheque. I was getting mine by running film arts. And uh, and the one thing I was not very good at Carnegie was writing. It was always the hardest thing for me. Directing, it was always wonderful because you had a script that was there and you had to work with. And the idea we were taught as directors at Carnegie was how to mine each scene, how to use all of the Stanislavski we've been taught and practiced as actors ourselves, how to help actors get a performance, and how to find all the points that were trying to be made in the script and enhance them whatever way you could. And directing was great fun because you're there in a room with your friends and your people and you're working, and it's a very sensual experience in the sense that you can really touch people and say, hey, it's whereas writing, you're in a cave by yourself.
It's a lonely business, right?
Yeah, so I never thought of myself really as a writer, but rather as a director. And having that whole classic training, I always sort of saw myself. By the time I got to my senior year, I realized I really wanted to gravitate toward film because no matter how wonderful a performance is live when you see it on the stage, and and that you can have electrifying moments in an audience watching a live performance, but when the curtain goes down, it's gone.
Yes.
Except in your memory,
Yeah.
Whereas if you get a great performance and you've captured it on film, you've got it forever, as long as
Immortalized.
Exactly. And I got emails. I get emails all the time from fans and friends around the world who say that they were just looking at Dr. David Banner again on the Hulk, which was now 40 more years ago, practically, and still being moved and touched and drawn in by the story. And also, so many of the people that I get emails from say that they themselves became a doctor because of watching Bill Bixby.
Because of Bill Bixby.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing, I get from people who watch my Alien Nation movies and TV series, where we were talking about intolerance and prejudice and discrimination and all of that.
I gotta stop you there for a second because I don't want to skirt over that. We got a lot to dig into there because I'm gonna tell you right off the bat, I love doing these interviews. But first and foremost, I am a fan, and I love those Incredible Hulk and Alien Nation. I do not want to skirt over those.
Well, we won't. But the important point that I wanted to make, though, was that I never really thought of myself as a writer. Yes, I could take a text, a script that someone else had written, and enhance it. But writing was the class I struggled the most with while I was in college. And when I got out of college, I managed to get into TV back in New York. I couldn't get film work, unfortunately, even though I had actually made a film while I was at Carnegie. There was no equipment, bear in mind. But again, my friend Bill Pence came to the rescue because Bill was in the Air Force doing his time, and he was running a film division at an Air Force base. And he said, well, what do you need? And I said, well, I need a camera, I need film. And he said, okay. He borrowed a camera from the Air Force and borrowed a few thousand feet of Tri-X negative film and sent it to me. And he said, okay, go make your movie. And so I've always, and Bill incidentally went on to create with his wife the Telluride Film Festival. later on.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have always, in my first novel, Man of Legends, I dedicated the book to Bill and to Stella because they had both been guiding lights in my career. And Bill, I always called him the godfather of my cinema career because film arts really got me into that. So I had made a film while I was at Carnegie. It was a little sort of half-hour thriller. I look at it nowadays. A lot of it really holds up, but I still find myself saying, "Gee, it's a pretty good 30-minute film, but it really would have been a better 20-minute film." So I do see the flaws, but I also see the eye of a director that was working, and the fact that I had managed to get it made, and had one of my music students at Carnegie at the time put together an orchestra, and he wrote a score for it, and so it was an exemplary piece of work that I could carry around under my arm and try to get work in New York. And I never got work at New York at first as in film. I fell into television because I was married and already had a little boy, David, and I had to eat and feed them. So I started working in television and became pretty successful as a producer director in television in New York. And then went on, which is a whole separate story, to become a producer and then executive producer of the Mike Douglas Show, which was the biggest daytime talk show. It was the only daytime talk show in American television at the time. Oprah, had a pretty large audience. The audience for the Mike Douglas Show, which aired 5 times a week, 90 minutes a day, the audience for the Mike Douglas Show was 10 times the size of Oprah, and yeah, it was phenomenal, phenomenal. And everybody in the world came through that was selling something. All of the actors that were pushing a movie or a TV show, all the writers that were pushing a book, all the politicians that were pushing themselves. Plus a lot of human interest stories that we would find and dig up too. But and I didn't want to do it. I had been successful in New York. I was just getting ready to go to California and try to get my foot in the door in films when I was offered an opportunity to work on the Douglas Show. And I said, I don't want to do it, and they said, "Oh, just go and meet the young guy that is going to be the executive producer right now, the new guy that's taken over." So I went over to meet him. His name was Roger Ailes.
Okay.
And this is the same Roger Ailes who later became the gargantuan Orwellian Roger Ailes, who did all kinds of horrible things to women and other things. And the worst crime, of course, was creating Fox News. But which I still remember Roger telling me, I want to create a news network for old white Republican guys. And that's what he did. But when I worked with Roger on the Douglas Show, he was a young, scrappy guy, not unlike myself, just a few years older. And we did 90 minutes a day, 6 times a week live, even though I said, I just want to make films. But Roger was very seductive in more ways than one. And he said, "Oh, I'll let you do a lot of film. That's what I want you to do." And so I got sucked in to the Douglas Show. And then when Roger left in '68 to produce Richard Nixon's campaign, I was told to take over the Douglas Show as an executive producer, and I was 25 at the time, and we were already in the 100 mark. We had more markets than NBC or ABC had.
Wow.
I figured, okay, I'll do it for 1 season, and that's all. But then and then I'll go to Hollywood, and with a pretty big credit. I mean, the Douglas Show was a really big credit, and I was the youngest guy ever to do that kind of thing. And I came to California and said, "Here I am, ready to make movies." And Hollywood said, "No, you're a talk show producer." And I said, "But wait, see, I have this film." And they said, "Well, it's nice, it's not bad, but you've never done any really big narrative filmmaking." And I said, "Well, no, that's why I'm here." And they said, "Well, yeah, but until you've done it for somebody else," it was like. And my friend Steve Bochco, who created Hill Street Blues and LA NYPD Blue much later. When I first arrived in Hollywood in '69, Steve was a fledgling writer who had gotten his foot in the door at Universal Studios. And Steve said, "Look, Kenny," and I was sleeping on his couch, literally, Steve. And he said, "Look, Kenny, actors can do bit parts and work their way up. Writers can write on spec until maybe somebody buys something that they've written, but directors, they either give you the money to do it or they don't, and usually they don't until you've done it for somebody else, you know. And I thought, and so he said, you really got to write. And I said, Steve, bless your heart, thank you. You're a writer. I'm not. I never have been. He said, yes, you can. And he just badgered me, Steve, literally, until I finally sat down and started writing and realized that, oh, okay, I guess I can do this. I guess I did absorb all of those plays that I read and that I saw and that I performed in while I was at Carnegie, all the movies that I had seen, thanks to Bill Pence. And I could recognize what was good writing, even if, whether it was my own or somebody else's. And I started writing and became a very prolific writer of unproduced screenplays. You know,
Wow.
so, yeah, and but finally, Bochco also gratefully introduced me to some of the pals that he had made already at Universal, who included Steve Cannell, who at the time was a fledgling young writer. He was a story editor on Adam 12, a cop show at the time, and
Right.
Steve Cannell, bless his heart, gave me a couple of writing assignments on that. So I wrote some scripts for Adam 12, and then leaned on him to get me a directing assignment on Adam 12. And he finally did, and it was my first shot at Universal. And Steve also introduced me to a guy named Harv Bennett, who was executive producer of a lot of big things like Rich Man, Poor Man, and
Yes, sir.
really big TV movies and all. And Harv read a screenplay that I had written for a feature, and he loved it. He said, "I can't help you get it produced; it's out of my wheelhouse." But I got this new show called The $6 Million Man, and we just went on the air for a mid-season, and now we're starting our first full season, and we got no scripts. And they were desperate, for ideas. And I suggested The Bride of Frankenstein. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you got this essentially monster guy who's got weird arms and legs and boop, 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 eye stuff. Shouldn't there be a female counterpart to that? Shouldn't there be like a Bionic Woman?" And Harv said, "That's a good idea." And he liked it. Frank Price liked it. The network liked the idea. So they hired me to write what became the Bionic Woman. And it was, and I wanted to do a love story, but 6 mil was, a mission kind of thing. So I had to pack all of this stuff into this script. And when they read the script, Harv and Universal and ABC, Harv called me and said, "Look, we love the script." I said, "That's great." He said, "But it's too dense. There's too much in it." I said, "I know. What do you want me to cut?" And Harv said, "We don't want you to cut anything. We want you to make it longer. And we're going to do a two-parter." I said,
Right.
"What do you mean? You've only got 60 minutes. Yeah, he said, "That's right. But we're going to do two 60-minute shows." And nobody's done that before at Universal. It was the first time. And so I said, "Do I get paid again?" And Harv said, "Absolutely do." And so I did. I wrote The Bionic Woman, and in about a week and a half, and Harv recognized that I had some producing and directing chops as well, and it sort of took me under his wing and let me be part of the editing of the shows he was already doing. And I was certainly integrally involved in the casting of Lindsay Wagner. We looked at a lot of actresses, and ultimately Harv said, "Who do you like? It's your call." And Lindsay was just hands down my choice, and Harv agreed. And then shortly thereafter, Harv said, "Look, I really want you to join $6 Million as a writing producer on the show." And I said, "Harv, producing is a pain in the ass. Can't I just write and direct? That's what I'd really like to do." And Harv said, "Kenny, let me explain television to you. In television, it is the producer who hires the writer and hires the director." I said, "Oh, okay." I get that idea. I could take that job and then hire myself, right? And he said, "That's right." And so that's what I did. And I joined 6 Mil, signed a contract with Universal. I was the youngest writer, producer, director on the Universal Studios campus and the lowest paid, Steve. Yep. But the Bionic Woman caused such a sensation when it aired on 6 Mil. The ratings went up. And, in spite of the fact that she died at the end of the two-parter.
Right.
Right. Well, and that's when I wrote the initial script, I left her in a sort of coma kind of thing.
Okay.
Right. And Universal said, no, 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 we want her dead. We don't want a lot of bionic people running around dead, dead. I said, guys, this is a mistake. They said, no, kill her off. We want to do love story, you know? And I said, we are doing a love story, but you could keep, no,
But we're
dead.
leaving the door just a little
That's
crack
right,
there,
just
right?
a little bit open. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No,
Yeah.
dead. And, you know, so cerebral hemorrhage, Jamie Summers, rest her soul, was gone. And then the letters started coming in from all over the country. My favorite came from the head of the psychology department at Boston University, who said, how dare you? How dare you create this wonderful female archetype, this role model for young women, and just toss her aside?
Right.
There was a lot of heavy duty mail like that. But what the studio and the network were really looking at was how the ratings had gone up, you know. So they came back to me and he said, why'd you kill her off anyway, Kenny? That was really a dumb idea. You know, it's like, I swear to God, it truly happened. And I said, well, they said, just bring her back to life. And I said, sure, okay, you know. And so we brought back, and I wrote a script for The Return of the Bionic Woman. And it went sailing in, took 6 mil into the top 10 for the first time. And then they wanted to spin it off into its separate series. The problem was that Lindsay, when we had done The Bionic Woman, originally had been a contract player for Universal, and after she died, they dropped her contract.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so Lindsay's agent had them over a barrel, and he went in and told them what it would cost to get her on board. And the studio said, that's crazy, you're insane, you'll never work again in this town, and she'll never work again in this town. I mean, they just bred in the riot act, and this was her manager that did this. And her agency was crazed because, oh my God, we've lost this opportunity. And then, of course, the next day, Universal called and said, okay, we'll pay what she wants. You know, and inside story is that Lee Majors wasn't too thrilled about that.
Really, eh?
Well, she was getting almost now the same money that he was getting, but
Oh,
Lee had been paying his dues for years and years, and you're working his way up to
yeah,
start
right.
in Big Valley and, you know, and other things.
Yep.
And here's Lindsay all of a sudden getting almost exactly the same. And so there was a little, you know, friction. Yeah, there was, but the two of them were professionals nonetheless, and they did the job, and it worked out okay. And they're still big friends today. I see them both. You know, I see Lindsay more often than Lee. But I saw Lee a year or so ago when the Hollywood Movie Museum here opened a big bionic exhibit. And Lee and I went to open it, and he's still the same sort of shit kicker guy he always was. You know, I always used to say, Lee always kind of talked like he had constipation. You know, it was like, you know, I'm having a little trouble here, Dave. Can you help me out? You know, and but he was here. He was well into his 80s, and the same funny, bright, sharp guy that I had so much fun with back all those years ago. And so what happens when you suddenly create a project that's in a particular genre, as the 6 Million Bionic Woman were, you know, then you become known in town as the sci-fi guy.
Right.
So first I was the talk show guy, producer guy, and now I had become the sci-fi guy, and it was very frustrating because I always envisioned myself as having a very eclectic kind of career, Steve, one that dabbled in all different genres and that sort of thing. And we were, by the time I was doing Bionic Woman and $6 Million Man, writing and producing them both at the same time.
Actually, if I could, Kenny,
it's like living in a garbage disposal, you know?
I'd like to ask you, you just actually gave me a wonderful segue there. When you're saying about the two of them together,
yeah,
you had stories, Kill Oscar, right, The Return of Bigfoot. And it wasn't like they do these days where you get, it's just a guest appearance of somebody. These shows you literally had to watch. The $6 Million Man, you had to see the Bionic, or you weren't going to get. What kind of a logistical nightmare was that?
Well, it was it was very complex. There was no question about it, because it was they were on. Each show was totally run separately. There were two separate shooting companies for each show, and when each of the two shows had the requirements of getting a show on the air, and which was, it's hard enough when you were doing an episodic television show. Harv told me when I told Harv, look, I really don't want to do episodic television, Harv, he said, listen, Kenny, doing episodic television is the greatest training in the world for making movies or for waging war. And it's true because, and the way I put it in perspective for people is when you're doing a movie, you have usually 9 or 10 months from the beginning until it's finished and it's in the theater to do 2 hours of film. When you're doing an episodic television show, in the same 9 months, you have to do 22 hours of film. Right. Which means it's like living in a garbage disposal, and you need a lot of writing help, and you need a lot of people. Fortunately, I was able to bring my dear friend Jim Parriott on board as a producer and writer with me, and who helped a lot, and a lot of other freelance writers that chipped in their work. A lot of times they had to be rewritten somewhat at the last minute by either Jim or myself. But the problem with it was, Steve, that I didn't have any time to direct. When you're the admiral and you've got to make sure the fleet is sailing in the right direction, you don't have time to get down on the deck and be the captain and have the fun of the battles day to day and making the movie, and it's hard enough when you're doing just one episodic show. When you've got two, it's just a killer in terms of your time and the logistics. And I eventually, that's why I had to say, look, I got to let go of 6 Mil. Lee was not happy, but I said, I can't do both shows. I don't have any time to direct. So I let go of 6 Mil and stayed with the one that I had created, which was Bionic Woman. And finally got myself, I hired myself and directed a couple of the first one I did for Bionic Woman was The Ghost Hunter. And then I did this big two-parter of The Doomsday is Tomorrow. And they were just shown on the Bionic Woman. But you're right that there were episodes, the network saw the opportunity for us to do those crossover episodes where you had to watch one series and then watch the other series and then go back and watch the first, because it really generated that. And for a while, Steve, I had the #1 and #3 shows in the country. 6 Mil was #1 and Bionic Woman was #3. And bear in mind, 6 Mil was on Sunday nights opposite All in the Family.
Right.
Who was always either #1 or they were usually the #2 show. Yeah. So we were. It was amazing to have that kind of an audience following, and it was always great fun to do. And Harv was right, incidentally. Steve Vachko and Cannell and I always really felt like we were the class of 1980 at Universal City Studios School, Universal University, really. Because we were always having to try to figure out how to make a dime look like a dollar. And when we did the Bionic, and when I did 6 Mil, started on 6 Mil, they were 6-day shoots. In other words, one episode of a 1 hour episodic television, you had 6 days to shoot it. 6 days to shoot it. And then you were supposed to have 6 weeks to get the post-production done and get it on the air. When we sold the Bionic Woman, I had to go to Frank Price, who was the head of Universal at the time, and say, Frank, we can't do the Bionic Woman in 6 days. It's going to take 7. And he said, no, that can't happen, Kenny. And Frank always used to play his cards very close to the vest. No, I'm sorry, episodic television is only 6 days, Kenny. He said, it's like a sonnet. A sonnet has 16 lines, no more, no less. If it's more than 16 lines, it's not a sonnet. And I said, Frank, then I've got to be able to write a couple of other characters in to take up some of the screen time so that Jamie doesn't have to be in every scene. No, the network wants her in every scene. I said, Lindsay won't be able to sustain that. She doesn't have the stamina for that. As a matter of fact, I don't know many actors that could. No, it has to be 6 days, has to be 6 days. I said, Frank, it's going to be 7. So we'd always board the show, that is, planned to do the show in 6 days, and it always went to 7. And of course, everybody blamed me, because of, oh, well, why can't you get it done? Well, because I told you I couldn't, And so we had the first 7-day show. And then pretty soon, other shows at Universal began to drift into being 7 days. And then that became the norm and the standard until The Incredible Hulk came along. And the way that happened was, again, it's the sci-fi guy thing. I had these 2 shows on the air that were doing, so suddenly I was like the golden boy at Universal for sci-fi particularly. And Frank called me and said, Kenny, we've just acquired the rights to the Marvel comic superheroes. Which one would you like to do? And I said, none of them, Frank. I don't enjoy spandex in primary colors. I can't see myself having a hamburger with the man from Atlantis or even Captain America, who was one of the 5 that they had gotten. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to get out of the sci-fi-ish mold,
Right.
So I was sitting at home trying to figure out that night how I could say no to Universal and ABC. And I was reading a book that my wife Susie had given me. Susie, who is one of the most literate people I know, she had read this particular book when she was about 16, I think. It was called Les Miserables. And so I was sitting at home and was in the middle of it. And I had Jean Valjean, the fugitive, and Inspector Javert.
Inspector Javert, yeah.
Pursuing him to the end of the earth. And the fugitive kind of concept. And I suddenly that night thought, well, I guess maybe there's a way that I could take a little bit of Victor Hugo here, a little bit of Robert Louis Stevenson, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and this ludicrous thing called The Incredible Hulk, and maybe turn it into some sort of psychological human drama.
Yep.
Sort of based on Greek tragedy, where the hero brings down the curse upon himself with his hubris, his self-confidence that,
right.
When you do that, the gods don't like it. That was the lessons that we learned from the Greek theater. The gods come to get you, And anyway, so I went to Frank Price the next day and I said, okay, Frank, look, I think I can make The Incredible Hulk work if you buy into this premise that I will tell you about. And I told him about it, and he said, this is great. It's great. We want to do that. I said, wait, there's more. It's got to be my casting. In other words, I don't want you guys shoving some actor down my throat that I don't think is right. Mm-hmm. And she said, yeah, absolutely, I'll cast control. And I said, but I want something in return. I actually called Bochco and asked him about that. And he said, oh, yeah, you can bargain off stuff all the time. I said, okay. So Frank, I said, what would you like to do, Kenny? And I said, well, I don't think that Sir Walter Scott's novel, Ivanhoe, novel of the written in the 1900s about the time period of the 1200s, where Robin Hood is one of the supporting players. It's a wonderful, romantic, swashbuckling story about this young knight. It's really like a medieval Star Wars. Where I
love Ivanhoe. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Where he has to save the country, and he's just this fledgling young knight, and King Richard is imprisoned, and he's got to get him out, And Frank said, that's great. You want to do Ivanhoe, what, like a miniseries, like a 4-hour miniseries? I said, that would be great. That would be great. And Frank said, okay, shake. You do The Incredible Hulk and we'll do Ivanhoe together. Okay, wow. Great. I sat down, Steve, and wrote the pilot for The Incredible Hulk, 125 pages or so, in 7 days. There was one day where I wrote 43 pages of script between 10 in the morning and 10 at night. And the telling thing is that we shot those white pages of my original script. When scripts get changes made, the changes are always come out on a different color paper, pink, blue. I mean, it's just
yep.
But when I tell people in the industry that I shot the white pages, they know that means I shot the first draft, and I sent the script to the only one I ever had in mind for it was Bill Bixby. I had seen Bill in a television play in 1973 called Steam Bath. You can still get it on Netflix. It's about this group of people that find themselves in Valerie Perrine, Bill, and a few other really good actors, and they're in this steam bath, and they can't quite remember how they got here or find the door out, you know. And there's this little Puerto Rican steam bath attendant who's walking around handing out the towels, you know, to everybody. And he's the only other person other than that. And finally, they slowly begin to realize this is purgatory. And the steam bath attendant, yeah, that's right, man. And they said, and who are you? He says, I'm God, man. And it turns out he is. You know? And in that 90-minute TV play, I saw Bix go through every emotion and color and humor and tears. It was just extraordinary. So there I was 4 years later writing the pilot for the script for the pilot. And I had Bill in my head the whole time I was writing it. And I said, he's the one I want. Universal said, that's great. He's a big TV star. And which I was looking for to bring an aura of class into the project, you know, because I mean, really. And when the agent gave Bill the script for the Hulk, Bill said, I'm not going to read anything called the Hulk. And his agent said, yes, you are, you know, and Bill read it. And I had met him a couple times previously, just in casual situations. But my phone rang next morning. Kenny, this is Bix. Can I come talk to you? And I said, sure, come on over. And so he came up to Universal. And Bill never just came into a room, Steve. Bill came into the room. You know, he was always like, somebody likened it to the first 8 bars of Tiger Rag. It's like, my room full of tiger, you know, that kind of, and that's how Bill would come into. Is this what we're going to do? We're really going to do like this? Am I going to suffer? Is it going to be painful? You know, because actors love to suffer. You know, it's true. Vincent Price told me once, if you want to win an Academy Award, play a drunken nun. You know, and it's true. Look at Rain Man and Dustin. I mean, you know,
right.
Bill
Forrest
said
Gump.
Exactly, Forrest Gump. Folks call me Forrest Gump. It's still one of my favorites. And then he wins the Academy Award the next year or maybe it was the other way around, for Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But Bill saw what I was trying to do, that I was doing a show that was not for kids. I was taking it as far away as I could from comic book origins. That's why I changed his name from Bruce Banner to David Banner, because of the alliteration. Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, Laura, it's Peter Parker. It's so comic booky, and I just hated it. And I told Stan, I said, look, I'll put it on the gravestone so you can see that it's David Bruce Banner, you know. Banner, and Stan said, yeah, go. I mean, Stan really had no problem at all with where I wanted to go with it and what I wanted to do, and he really understood it. There's one quick story that you may have heard. If you have, then stop me and I'll go on. But when I wrote the pilot for the Hulk, I also had to write a second TV movie for CBS, which would be sort of, because the pilot would be a Genesis pilot. How did this happen?
Yep.
And the second movie was showing how it could work as a series. In it, I wrote a scene where the creature, I never called him the Hulk, I always called him the creature, had a fight with a bear. And Stan called me from New York. He said, I wrote the script. I love it. It's so great. I love the fight with a bear, but it ought to be a robot bear. And I said, no, Stan, let me explain why. Okay, here's why, Stan. The audience that we're playing to, which I hope to be an adult audience, will only give you so many buys. They will only buy so much. Now, Stan, we are asking the audience to buy that Bill Bixby metamorphoses into Lou Ferrigno. That's a really big buy.
Big buy, right? Yep.
As soon as you introduce a robot bear, you're off the charts. But on the Bionic shows, you do the Bionics robots. I said, yes, but on the Bionic shows, it's about robotics and robotics interrelated with human, so it makes sense. And we went around and around about it. And finally, it came to a head when I had I knew my desire was to try to put a Lou's character, the creature, into the real world as much as I possibly could. George Burns, I worked with one time, and I asked him how he was able to draw an audience into his fabricated stories, and get laughs and everything. And he said, Kenny, the important thing when you're telling a lie or telling a story, is put as much truth in it
In
as you
there as you
can.
can.
Yeah, get them to buy this and this and this, and then make the little half step that you need beyond that. And so I said, explain that to Stan, so I wanted to put it in the real world. And when I was thinking about episodes that I wanted to see on the series, I said, the real world, the realest world I can think about that everybody sees and understands as the real world is Times Square in New York. And I called Frank Price and I said, Frank, I know we shoot in LA and I know this will cost extra money, but I need to take Lou to New York and run him up Times Square and Park Avenue. And he said, that's a great idea. Go for it. And so I took Louis and our makeup people back, picked up the small crew in New York. And literally we were in freezing March of 1978. We're Lou running down Times Square, right down Broadway. Steadicam guy behind him, me behind the Steadicam guy, and of course everybody's gawking and looking, which they would be anyway if there was a real Hulk running down, So it was fun to have all the extras there that we didn't have to pay for. And I had a camera on the top of the New York Times building, shooting back the other way so I could isolate him. I mean, really, I planted him in the middle of New York. And when we broke for lunch, I knew that Stan's office was over just a block on 6th Avenue. And I said, God, I really better go over and see him. We never resolved our argument about the bear, And, so I went over to Stan's office and he came bounding out of his office when he heard I was there. And he said, did you get my letter? I said, what letter? What? I just wrote you a letter saying about the bear. I said, yeah. What? He said, I just wrote to say you were right and I was wrong.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And Stan, bless his sweetheart, for the whole rest of his life, always said that of all of the adaptations that had been done of all of his Marvel work, he still felt that what we did on the pilot of The Incredible Hulk was the best one. And also put The Incredible Hulk into the public consciousness because the comic book had not been very successful. It was just a lower, echelon of the Marvel canon. But suddenly when there was Louis, and the other quick funny thing about doing this shooting the scene in New York is Louis, as you know, was deaf.
Yes.
Had been deaf since he was about 6 years old. But he had 6 years, but he had like 12 years, I think, of speech therapy, right? But it was in Brooklyn. Louis was raised in Brooklyn, And Louis used to say to me, Kenny, why doesn't the Incredible Hulk have more dialogue? And I would always say, Louis, it's because he didn't come from Brooklyn.
Because he didn't come from Brooklyn.
No. Well, also, I decided early on, even before I knew it was going to be Lou, I decided that Hulk speaks sound dumb. We don't need to hear Hulk smash. We see that, So I thought better mute than.
100%.
Yeah, because you end up with food good. It's like.
Yeah.
But to New York, the New York story, when we were doing the thing in New York with Lou, his whole family from Flatbush came over and they were all in his trailer, this big trailer that we had. And I walked in and everybody's saying, hey, Louie, hey, Tony, Vinny, hey, how are you, man? And the whole family's talking like Louie does, because they're from Brooklyn. And that's the way you talk when you're in Brooklyn, And, but it was great. And Lou also really, really matured and grew into the role as we did it because he'd never done any acting before. And there was so much I was concerned about, particularly on the downside. I mean, after he had metamorphosed and he'd smashed a few things and turned some cars over, there was the time that was my favorite, which was when he was coming down from being the enraged creature.
Yeah.
And those were the moments where somebody could teach him how to open a soda can or something, and things like that that were so sort of sweet and touching. And he and I are still really, really close friends and always have been, But,
that pilot, though, you mentioned, just to go back to the pilot for a second, it stands up incredible. It stands the test of time incredibly well. Like we've had these other versions, like we had the Eric Bana and version, right? And but it's funny, Kenny, because I've gone back to those. I haven't gone back to the Eric Bana once. I have gone back to the other one a couple of times, but the pilot, I go back to it again and again and again. And that scene where he first transforms, where Bill Bixby transforms, it almost plays out like a horror movie. It's really an intense scene.
Right, and that's exactly what I wanted it to be, and I didn't want it to happen because somebody had beaten him up or something like that, or or the whole gamma ray. He was near a gamma bomb explosion. I said, no, that I threw out everything in the comic book except that he turns that he gets angry when he gets angry he makes the metamorphosis. I fought and fought to let with Stan. I said, why is he green, Stan? What is he, the envious Hulk? The jealous Hulk, why is he green? And Stan said, well, it was because the printer thought they could do a really pretty good green. He started out in black and white in the comics, and then they decided he could be like green. They could do a consistent green, and so Stan said, well, let's go with green. And I said, Stan, that's not organic. It goes against everything I was taught in my theatrical upraising and education. We must be logical. We must make sense. And now I understand that occasionally the Hulk does turn up in red. I'll tell you one other story. I was at the premiere of the first Hulk movie that they did. Ang Lee directing.
Yes, right.
A brilliant director. I mean, how do you get past Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon? I mean, and all of his later work, but the wrong guy for this, And it was just the movie was just so embarrassingly bad, and I had nothing to do with it at all. I did. Louis just got me invited to the premiere, as a matter of fact. And as we're leaving the theater, one of the guys from Variety snagged me and said, Mr. Johnson, oh God, I should tell you too that in the whole movie, the only line that got a rise out of the audience was, don't make me angry, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry, which was the line that I wrote. And
exactly.
When I filmed it, I don't know if you know this, Steve, but the scene that you see in the main title of The Hulk All the Time, which includes that line, that was take 2 of that scene. Because in take 1, Bill came out hustling Jack McGee out of the laboratory, and Bill was playing it angry. Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. I said, cut, stop, wait. And I went up and I whispered in Bill's ear, Bix, it's a joke.
Yeah.
And he said, oh. And then he went back and we did what you have now seen with that little twinkle in his eye and then moment, which is just magnificently played. And so now I'm walking out of the theater of the Hulk movie, and the guy from Variety snags me, and he says, Mr. Johnson, don't make me Ang Lee. You wouldn't like me when One of the all-time great quotes, it's true. And I think that the show has held up in spite of the bell bottoms on the jeans because what we were trying to always do was have a layer of substance about it. I mean, the underlying theme of the Hulk was self-control. Was here the hero had brought down the curse upon himself, just like the Greek tragedies had the heroes had them, and now he was struggling back against that, and he was on this quest to gain that self-control. And to sort of control the raging demon that wells within him, I think is the way that the line went. And what we tried to do as often as we could, Steve, was do episodes about people who Bix would encounter who had their own version of the Hulk working as the enemy within them, And so
addiction, alcoholism, all these things, they're all our Hulks, right?
That's exactly right. Is it greed? Is it so when a writer would come in to tell us an idea for a storyline for one of the episodes, they'd start with a plot, and I'd say, wait, before you get to the plot, tell me what it's about. Is it about obsession? Is it about greed? Is it about what's it about? And then we tried to keep that feeling alive, and we didn't succeed. And 88 hours of episodes, and some are better than others, obviously. But that's what we were striving for always, and that sense of an underlying substance, which is why the show's largest single audience segment. We were a 4-quadrant show. We appealed to adult men, adult women, teens, and kids. But the largest single audience of the show was adult women.
Right.
And that's been true, Steve, of my whole career. Not just it was certainly true on the Bionic Woman, the Bionic shows, and also on throughout the Hulk, and then later into the later work of V, and really everything else I've done. And it's not because I set out to say, well, how can I write shows that will appeal to women? It's just I wrote what I felt was right, and I've written and enjoyed writing strong female characters throughout my career because I was raised by a very strong, independent woman. She was not a single mom. I had a stepfather, and my real father, biological father, I saw some, but not as much. And she had her faults. She was a virulent anti-Semite. She was a virulent bigot, but she was also a very self-confident professional woman who could handle herself in a room full of men, obviously not making as much money as they were. So I'd always had that image of a strong, empowered, equal woman in my head. And that's why I think I've written so many strong female characters. Also because I think that the actresses in Hollywood are so underserved. It's the hero and his girlfriend, or the hero and his wife, or the hero, you know what I mean? As opposed to, and that's one of the reasons the Bionic Woman popped so much. It's also, I get a lot of letters from the LGBTQ community about the Bionic Woman.
Right.
Because so many people in that community are fans because they recognize Jamie as someone who looks one way on the outside, but is really very, very different on the inside.
Very, very different. And if I may, Kenny, you have this gift for, let's look at the Hulk, for example, for a second. On paper, someone says you do the show of the Hulk, the automatic thought is, oh, they want superhero versus supervillain, right? You have this gift for giving sci-fi fans the ingredients that they think they want, but the food that you really want. For the Hulk, one of my favorite episodes, again, it's jumping out of a human drama, Homecoming, where it literally just comes out of Banner's just feeling that I want to be home, and this great story that erupts from it. So I see what you're saying there. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah. No, okay. Now you just gave me a segue, and I can't let that go by. Homecoming. I got this new book.
Yes, Homecoming.
Homecoming. Yes, get it? So I'm sorry, I couldn't let that go by.
No, that's perfect.
It is out and available now in hardcover and in digital and in Kindle and in Sanskrit and whatever you want. And
for our viewers, we will be dropping links at the bottom of this where you can get Homecoming. So make sure you check out below.
Oh yeah, that's great. And also we recorded just a couple of weeks ago the audio book for it. And because it's told in the first person, like Dr. Watson having written supposedly writing what Conan Doyle wrote, the publisher initially said, I said, how are you planning to do the audiobook? Because I'd done them for my other two earlier novels. And he said, well, we just think one actress, one voice. And I said, wait a minute. You're going to have an American woman doing dialogue back and forth with a high Victorian British male? And you think you've got an actress that could pull that off? Oh, well, they're very talented people. I said, it's not good. You need at least to bring in a British voice, and not somebody like me doing a British voice. I could do it, but goodness gracious, or you, right, there you go. And they went around and around, and finally they said, okay, we'll hire a real Brit to do that dialogue. I said, that's great. Now, what are you going to do about the roles that are clearly defined in the book as being Black or Hispanic? And they said, oh, yeah, right. Well, maybe we should. Yeah, I said, right. Maybe you should hire a few other actors like I've done on my other books. Okay. And then I pushed the final edge, because normally when audiobooks are done, it's like doing an animated movie. One character comes in, one actor sits in the booth, like Robin Williams doing the genie, and he does all the genie's lines, but he doesn't hear any of the lines coming back at him. He has to make it.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, I was trained in the theater, and I know the value of playing off of another actor. And what we really ought to do is let the character of Holmes and the character of Amy Winslow, his new Watson, be recorded simultaneously so they can hear each other and play off of each other. well, I don't know. We've never done anything like, oh, listen, I'm telling you, it'll make all the difference in the world. And why not? It won't take any more time. Let's just do it. It'll take less time even. And so finally, they decided, okay, that's good. All right. So then I started pressing a little further and said, well, we really ought to do that with all the characters, not just those two, but all of them. And so I ended up with a cast of like 5 or 6, plus myself doing a few of the voices. And then I pushed the final envelope where I said, we really ought to do it so that they can all do it and hear each other. But we were over 8 time zones. We had me and a couple of actors in Los Angeles. There was another one in Phoenix, another one in New York City. The guy overseeing the whole process was in Nyack, New York, and Rory Barnett, who did the Holmes role, was in London. 8 hours apart. But all of them agreed to do it. And so we recorded the whole audiobook that way, and it's like a radio play. It's just
Wow.
so. And then they're all it has that extra energy that you get when people are hearing each other and playing off of each other. And the actors were all like kids in a candy store because they all said, we've never done anything like this before. It's great. So anyway, I can recommend the audiobook and as well as the novel, which is a lot of fun seeing Holmes as a fish out of water. Still the same eccentric, cocaine-addicted, sexist genius, but he's 100 years out of sync. So sometimes his brilliant deductions are just a little skewed. Yes, exactly. Sometimes they're just funny. Sometimes they're really dangerous. So anyway, it's a fun book that I had fun writing, and I hope audiences will like reading it or listening to it. But anyway, I couldn't resist the Homecoming. Sorry.
No, absolutely. And Kenny, we haven't even touched on V, and I gotta tell you, I like to take at least one fan moment in these interviews, and V means so much to me. It just absolutely like the original. When I know you probably know this anecdote, but if you don't, when V originally came out in '84, and obviously there was V, and then there was V: The Final Battle, which I know that but let me tell you this. The BBC were showing the 1984 Olympics, and ITV, you probably know this, showed V and V: The Final Battle back to back over 5 nights. It smashed the Olympics in the ratings. People couldn't believe it. Please, how long had you been working on V before it was finally greenlit by the network?
About 20 minutes.
Really?
No. What happened was the short version is this. I was a big fan of the American novelist Sinclair Lewis. Wrote Aerosmith, wrote Elmer Gantry, wrote a lot of Main Street, a lot of wonderful books. And I came across one that I hadn't read called It Can't Happen Here. Which was a novel he wrote in 1935 about the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany that was happening, but how, well, it can't happen here. This is America, and of course, the premise of the book is that it does happen.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to see how a spectrum of people, everyday ordinary people, not presidents and generals and that sort of thing, but just everyday people, would react if suddenly there were a sea change in our country. Suddenly, overnight, we were in a different country and under different rules, and the media was controlled, and and it was an autocratic situation, and that really intrigued me, and so I wrote a screenplay. It was called Storm Warnings. And it was really, and I really did a lot of research, Steve, into the rise of the Third Reich, into how Hitler happened, and I flavored all of the contemporary story in our America, how a grassroots thing suddenly just explodes overnight, and wait a minute, where are we? Yeah. And I was having dinner one night with my friend Brandon Tartikoff, who was then president of NBC. And we'd worked together on other things in the past. And what do you got going, Kenny? And I told him about this, and he said, I want to read that. And I said, no, Brandon, this is a feature. It's got to be a big, not television, And he said, just let me read it. So I let him read it, and he called me the next day, and he said, we got to do this, and you got to come talk to us. So I'm sitting in his office. And he said, we just love the whole idea of America being under occupation, because that's what really the book became to be about.
Yeah.
And he said, but, and maybe you've heard this part of this too, Steve, already. Brendan didn't think that the American public would get fascism. Couldn't it be a really outside source like the Soviets, the then Soviets, or the Chinese? And I just said, I don't think they can sustain a protracted occupation. And I'm pretty sure it was Jeff Sagansky, who at the time was Brandon's executive vice president, just out of law school in Harvard, and a really scrappy guy, an interesting guy who became a big advocate of mine over the years. And Jeff piped up and said, "How about aliens, Kenny?" And I went, it's like, no, I didn't want to keep going down that road. And I said, I don't want any more alien stuff. And Brandon said, "It's okay, don't, just think about it, just think about it tonight. Just take So I went back and I'm sitting at home that night, and I thought, that's really a brilliant idea, because I can still tell the same exact story that I want to tell, which is about how people react to power. How when the Nazis rolled into France, how there were some people who immediately collaborated and became the Vichy French that were collaborating with the Nazis. How there were people in the middle who saw, well, if I keep my head down and I'm not Jewish, they won't come after me. And then there are the people who say, wrong, this is being abused, and we have to fight back against it. And they, of course, became the heroes of the resistance during World War II. Right. And that's the story that I wanted to tell, how people reacted to power individually. In that spectrum of people, some would suck up, some would try to keep their heads down, and some would fight back. And I went back, and also what I would get by doing it as a science fiction piece is the big spacecrafts rolling in over all of the cities, and that razzle dazzle kind of thing. And what happened with the Nazis, of course, is that they started saying hi to the Dutch. Hi, we're your friends. We're here. We're the Nazis. We're the new guys in town, but we're here to save you from the English. They're going to mine. Yeah, we have all that for you. And then slowly they revealed their other face, and I realized, well, I can really physically reveal another face.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I realized that I could do that. The frustrations that I had, Steve, were that the technology was still in its infancy.
Right.
When I had to change Bix into that first time into the creature, we had to do it the same way that they did Lon Chaney and the Wolfman. Right. Put a little makeup on him, shoot a little film, go off and do some more makeup on him, bring him back, and do a series of funky dissolves. There was no morphing that could be done. It was very frustrating, and it was the same thing here. I was working with all of the top class guys that had just worked with Steven or with George Lucas, and Steven Spielberg or Lucas, and but we were all of us still using rubber masks with air hoses going into it, and that kind of stuff. And the visual effects were at their infancy. I mean, you couldn't pan a camera with in a visual effect because you just couldn't do that in those days. You had to lock the camera off and let the visual effect play, and then cut to something else. And it was so incredibly frustrating because I couldn't make it look the way that I wanted to look. And in spite of the fact that I had the same guys that had done Star Wars, but the difference was in Star Wars, when they were doing those spacecraft flying around, they were flying against a black sky in most places, right, where you can with a world of stuff that you can't get away with when you're trying to put something into the real world.
In the real world, right? Yeah.
The lighting match and everything, it was very, very frustrating from that standpoint. But the other problem was that NBC was in the toilet. ABC and CBS were much higher in the ratings. NBC had nothing going on. Brandon really needed something big and splashy that he could open with, and he was really eager to make it happen as quickly as possible. So when I went back in and said, okay, I think I can do this, I said, let me come tell you the story. He said, no, just send it over. We'll read it. I said, you don't know how to read. I don't trust you to read. I will tell you the story, because when I'm there telling the story, Steve, if I sense they've got a problem with it, I can deal with it right in the moment, and not have to try to clean up afterwards. I can just fix it there, or say, oh yeah, I got that covered. I'll tell you later. But I can bullshit my way through it, basically. And so I sat for an hour and a half telling Brandon and Jeff Sagansky and the other guys in the room the story. And at the end of it, Brandon said, "That's fantastic. This is going to be a great big mini series. Could even spin into a series. How long do you think? It sounds like about 6 hours." I said, "Well, I think I can do it in 4." And he said, "Whatever it is, that's how long it'll be, and you got it, and go do it." So I then wrote the script in 19 days, 230-page screenplay in 19 days. And Brandon read my first draft screenplay over a weekend and said, "Okay, go to production." And Warner's was thrilled because they hadn't sold anything that year. There was no TV shows shooting on the Warner lot. There were very few features. And so they were thrilled and delighted to get this order. But the problem is that Brandon really wanted it very fast. He told me he normally on a project like this, you'd have for a 4-hour miniseries, you'd probably have 4 or 5 months to prep it just before you started shooting. Okay, that's the normal deal. From the day that Brandon said go till the day I said action on the set was 2.5 weeks. That was all the prep time we had when we started shooting. And I tell that to people in the industry, and they go, "No, that's impossible. You can't do that, you know." And I said, "We did." I had the benefit of bringing my whole Hulk crew over from Universal to Warner's, so that helped. But what we quickly discovered was we couldn't prep it in 2.5 weeks, but we did as much as we could in 2.5 weeks, including the casting, which was not finished in 2.5 weeks. And then we started shooting. And every weekend we would come in and I'd spend the weekend prepping for the next week, and just to try to get through it 1 week at a time. And spaceships had to be built, so they had to be pushed to the end of the shooting, and we had to shoot we didn't have the stuff we needed
because it was all models back then. None of this.
No. We were starting from scratch, and Chuck Davis designed the spacecraft literally over a weekend.
Wow!
I still have the original designs. And then Greg Jean came in, and who had built the Starship Enterprise and also the Close Encounters mothership, and his crew came in. I mean, I had the guys, I had the guys, but they were all working under the gun, and we didn't even have a budget from Warner Brothers until we were 3 weeks into the principal photography. We didn't even have a budget to know how much it was going to cost. And when we did get the budget, it was way wrong because they hadn't factored in all of the overtime that we were having to incur by working on weekends. There were some people, about golden time they talk about is when you're getting paid extra. On V, we had what we call Diamond Jubilee time. I still have crew members that come up and say, "Kenny, I'm still driving that car that you bought me back in, or that house or whatever." But so we didn't have a budget until 3 weeks into the filming, and then 4 weeks into the principal photography, one of my leading ladies was murdered. And that was Dominique Dunn,
That's who Blair Tefkin took over from, right? Okay.
That's right. Yeah. A crazy boyfriend put her scarf around her neck and strangled her. She went into a coma, and I was the first one at the hospital, actually. And and I talked to the doctor like, "Well, how long is she going to be out?" And he said, "Go look." And she was in a coma, and they'd shaved her head, and it was so painful. And I was with the family also 4 or 5 days later when they finally took her off life support. And it was devastating because Dominique was this 18-year-old brilliant young actress who was also endearing to all of us. It felt like a daughter to me. And she would come to the dailies with me at night, not with scenes she was in, just to see what I was doing and how it was all working together. And so it was brutal, and it was a devastating thing for Blair to have to step into. And bless her heart, she did a yeoman's job. But we had to go back and reshoot, a full week's worth of things. So we were saddled with all of that, at the same time. And then I began to discover that every week the budget on V was going up, and we were going over budget. I said, "Wait a minute, I'm still, except for the days we had to reshoot, which were covered by insurance, by the way, I was on schedule." I said, and what I came to discover, Steve, was that because nothing else was shooting on the lot at the time, a lot of departmental charges were getting dumped into our account.
Okay.
We bought more carpet for executives' offices and more fuel for the Warner Brothers jet that was never on the screen. So it was
Yeah.
it was a very frustrating situation. But the end result, V really is, I feel, my legacy piece of all, because in one way or another, the Bionic Woman, the Hulk, were all my takes on something that had previously existed.
But this was yours.
Yeah, and Alien Nation the same way. There was something there that existed that I just took and remolded and made into something that worked.
Yeah.
But V came entirely out of my little pea brain, and because of that, when I discovered that I owned the motion picture rights a few years ago, I suddenly had a lot of new best friends, all of whom, all the major studios came at me and wanted to buy the rights, the movie rights, for an exorbitant amount of money, which anyone would normally say, yes, sure, and I could produce. I absolutely could produce. They probably would let me write, but for directing, we're thinking, other people that I would not have suggested. And I said no. And in true Hollywood tradition, Steve, when I said no, each one of the studios, I got the same response each time. They said, okay, we understand. How much money do you really
What
want?
do we get? What is it going to take, right?
What is it going to take? Yeah. And I
Yeah.
said, guys, you don't get it. I was so afraid of being sidelined, and having seen how people had really missed their chance in trying to remake the Bionic Woman or remake the Incredible Hulk as features until the Avengers came along. That I just was fearful of seeing my baby, And my wife Susie, again, my muse, cleared it up very quickly. She said, here's all you have to ask yourself: would you rather the movie never got made or got made wrong by the wrong people?
Right.
I said, Suze, you're right. So since then, we've been trying to put together private equity financing to do it as an independent picture.
Right.
And
Okay.
we're still at it, because we've had it set up like 3 times, once with Chinese money, once with Indian money from Mumbai, and once with this pharmaceutical billionaire who actually we got a big chunk of change from, so that we could he optioned the rights so that we could start prepping and everything. But he had a 6-month option and it never quite came in. And then the Hollywood Reporter did an expose about how this guy was a total sham and had been screwing around a lot of other people. We were the only ones that ever got a dime out of him. And he's now being sued by CBS and for fraud. And so it's like, it's not easy, getting the money together that you need, but we're still working on it.
But to bringing it to, kind of your baby again, this is your creation,
right.
The very best science fiction, it's equal parts reflective and predictive, right? V, as you had mentioned, was allegorical of World War II. Kenny, do you ever look at the world now, and the media's reporters are being demonized, the scientific community is being, except for fascism is on the rise again, except for UFOs flying over the V is coming true, and it's more, perhaps more relevant today than ever.
I know the great beauty of V, Steve, is that it's a timeless story, because it really is Spartacus and the Revolt of the Slaves, or the American Revolution, or apartheid being overturned. So that gives it a timeless sort of quality, because that's the underlying story is timeless, of fighting against an oppressive force on the outside, and at the same time, you're absolutely right. It is so incredibly timely. There were a number of articles and such written about how V predicted the Trump presidency, and about how it predicted this sort of ultra right wing never mind the facts, never mind the truth. I have my alternate facts, and it's really really scary. I was speaking to someone this morning about what a dangerous moment we are in this country, when over half of the candidates that are up for election are people who deny that the election ever took place, despite all the evidence we've seen from the January 6th committee. You know, I mean, Liz Cheney has found herself a place in the highest of heavens for her integrity and for her determination to get to the truth and try to get the truth out to American people, and Kinzinger as well, Adam Kinzinger as well, and the fact that over half of the people that are running are totally denying the facts that are right there before us to see, if Fox News would let them see it.
Would let them see it, right? Yeah.
Right. And because they don't see it, they're in a silo, and I don't know where we go, and it's really dangerous. But you're right; it does make revisiting DV all the more logical, and how it still works, and see, in many ways, Alien Nation falls into that situation too, because when I got a call about trying to turn Alien Nation, the movie, into something, I said, I don't even want to see that movie. Fox called me, and they said, please just come and look at it. We think there might be a series. And and for me, they just missed it, and it was not a very good movie, and sort of Miami Vice with coneheads and buddy cop, but no substance. And until there was one scene where I saw Jimmy Kahn picking up Mandy Patinkin, his alien partner, and Mandy waving to his wife and two little kids. Just one shot in the movie where we see this alien woman and two little kids, and the bell went off in my head, sitting alone in the screening room, and I said, "Oh, there's the story. It's about them. It's about what it's like to be the world's newest minority." And I went back to Fox execs and said, "Okay, you guys think you've got Lethal Weapon with aliens? Yeah, that's so cool." I said, "No, that's not what this show is. Let me do something like In the Heat of the Night."
Yeah.
About intolerance and prejudice, like what I grew up with my mother and stepfather being so anti-Semitic and bigoted, and them and us and all of that. I said, let me do a show about that. And we got something that can really have substance, and at the same time we can have great fun with it, that they're a whole different species. But the essence of the show will be to show what it's like to be Vietnamese in Galveston, Texas in 1970, or Black in Chicago today, for that matter. And one quick anecdote: I got a letter from a Black doctor in Detroit who said, "I was so angry when I saw this alien show was going to come on." I said, "Why do we need another show about stupid aliens? Why don't they do a show about the Black experience?" He said, "But then I saw your show and realized it was about the Black experience."
You did it, yeah.
Finally, and we got awards from the Asian American community, the Hispanic community, the LGBTQ. Everybody thought it was about them, which in fact it was.
Yeah.
And I think when you can take something like that and make people think without antagonizing them or making them angry because you're talking about them, then you maybe can get people's minds to open up a little bit. And that's been one of the primary thrusts of my career. Even in Short Circuit 2, the movie that I did was about the little robot, who was, people couldn't see past the surface, Steve.
Yeah,
they couldn't to see the human soul burning within. And I told Jeff, it was Sagansky that asked me to do that movie. And when I read the script, I said, "Jeff, it's wonderful, but you're missing the fact that you've got the Elephant Man here." He said, "What are you talking about? It's a funny little movie about a robot." And I said, yeah, it is. But it's also about stereotypes and how you can't see past the surface. Yeah. I said, let me dig into that. And I'll make it a movie that has deeper meanings, that will have people crying with our hero as well as laughing. And I won't lose the comedy and stuff, but it'll be much more soulful and speak much more to appreciating people who don't look like you.
That's, unfortunately, we're at our time. I could have done this forever. Kenny, I'm going to ask you if you could possibly stick around for 2 minutes after we end the show here.
I'll be happy to, Stephen. My thanks and appreciation to all of your folks who are watching and having the opportunity to to have your questions and hear what I've had to say. It means a lot to me. Thanks.
You have been so generous with your time, sir. I really appreciate it. And, you know, seriously, good luck with the new book. I will be picking up a copy myself. And seriously, you're welcome on iScreemZ anytime. Thank you very much.
You bet. Take care.